Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Terentia Browne. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Chain. We have Nathaniel in studio today and myself. We are talking about a topic that's very close to our hearts, how to ace an interview. So welcome, Nathaniel.
Good to be back. I'm very excited about this topic. Obviously, it's what I do in my day-to-day, so I should hope it's something that's in my wheelhouse.
Absolutely. Well, we were talking earlier, and I think you said you've done probably over 10,000 of these interview preps.
Oh, man. I've been doing executive search now for over 11, 12 years, which I feel like I make the joke all the time of like anytime over 10 years feels like, I hate saying it. Over a decade seems like way too much experience. But yeah, I've been handling these type of interviews. I've hundreds each week. So it's a topic that I probably am doing interview prep with a candidate every day, if not 2 or 3 times per day. So for the last 10 years.
Great. Amazing. So really the topic today, we want to be able to give whether you are a first-time job seeker or seasoned professional, some practical tools that Nate basically shares with candidates on a daily basis. But also we want to take another perspective as well from the hiring manager side. And so, we are very much mindful that going into an interview room can be intimidating. It can be very stressful. You walk in feeling anxious. And so we just want to help you with some preparation because preparation does matter. And what we want to also share is how emotional intelligence can be a game changer that maybe you didn't know you needed as you walk into the interview room. And so just a few stats that maybe will get you excited for the episode today. We've pulled up some stats that say about 48% of interviews fail due to lack of preparation. And so that's really what we want to do today is give you just a bit of a breakdown in terms of how you can prepare yourself before an interview. 63% of hiring decisions are made within the first 5 minutes, so which means your first impressions count, and preparation really helps you to make a very strong first impression. And also 75% of candidates experience anxiety before interviews. And so we hope that through this episode today, it helps to significantly reduce your nervousness and helps to boost your confidence. So let's get us started. Nate, I'm going to put it back onto you. Where should somebody start? What is the first thing that somebody should think about when preparing for an interview?
Well, first off, I really enjoyed those statistics that you shared. And I think there's a few things I just wanted to air on those before I move forward. First being preparation is so critical. And most of the time, the reason I'm doing interview prep to begin with is just to set time aside with someone to sit down, to really reflect on the interview itself. I think a lot of us from our feeling, I think, oh, I know enough, or I'll go into it and I'll wing it. And realistically, I say this to all candidates, it's not always the best candidate on paper that gets the job. That'll be the person that does take the time to sit down, review, and really prepare for an interview. And to your second statistic, that 5% of, or in the first 5 minutes, the interview is confirmed. That's a lot because if you're coming in with confidence and with the right body language and the right tools that we're going to talk about on this episode, yes, people get to see a glimpse of that interview. And I remember reading about a study, I think done by the University of Wisconsin, where they had students sit down and watch it was something like a minute of 30 interviews, and they could 95% of the time, they could successfully confirm whether or not that person got the job or didn't get the job.
Amazing.
So we'll talk about the impact of that as well on really what is it, what are the nonverbal and non-content specific actions that are driving our response. So for me, the thing that I want to cover today or to give people perspective is you really just need to put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer and as an interviewee. And that's why I'm so excited to do this episode with you today, Terentia. Not funny enough that you were a candidate I was coaching through probably something very similar. I've honed it since I placed you 10 years ago.
Great.
But now, after all these years, you've had experience hiring people directly yourself. So really the biggest thing is to understand what someone like you would be looking for so that the interviewer can adapt to the interview.
Absolutely. I think it's so key that we take both perspectives because that's part of the emotional intelligence, that social awareness, putting yourselves in the shoes of somebody else and then preparing accordingly. So I'm excited for us to get started.
And I can say that let's talk through preparation and what that means to begin with. So for
Great.
you, the hiring manager, I would say there are three things that a hiring manager looks for, and correct me, T, or add if you'd like to add
Mm,
into it. But one, they want to know, can you do the job? Do you have the
yes.
experience that's required for the role? Two, do you want the job? So do you actually have motivations to come and work for that company? And three, what's the added value? What do you bring outside of other applicants that they're considering that are your unique selling points? And what I
Yeah.
really want to pull apart to start is the first piece, which is the
Mm,
can you do the role? And when people step into an interview room, it's highly likely that your CV has been shared with the hiring manager, we hope,
mm,
and they have looked at your technical skills and assessed that you are the right fit for the role. Right? On paper, you're ticking boxes for them.
yeah.
It is now in your hands to reconfirm to that hiring manager that you are the right person for the role. And I
Yes.
always say to people that the first step is to really go through your experience line by line and understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your achievements. And I like to compare this as what is the quantifiable data in your CV? What is the stuff that someone could ask you about that you need to answer logically with, that you need to know that information? And the reality is, if I think about projects I worked on 5 years ago, could I give you the basics introduction to that? Yeah, of course I could. Could I give you, but if someone wanted to know key data or information, like how long did that project last, or what was the
Mm,
financial impact and things of that nature, I could stumble over those questions. And so it's really pivotal. I always say that you're trying to, you almost are acting and selling in an interview.
yeah.
And why do actors invoke so much emotion to us as viewers in movies? It's because they know their lines like the back of
Yes.
their hand, right? So they can focus on the delivery. And so
Mm,
you are your product, so you have to understand yourself. And I find the funniest thing to express to people is just being able to know your lines, because
exactly.
um, then you can really impact an interview.
I agree. And I think this is, the first core of emotional intelligence is the self-awareness. And so that's exactly what you're saying. Are you demonstrating that self-awareness to that interviewer? Was it just words on paper that they had read from the CV? But are you able to articulate beyond those words from the CV? So, you're talking about the strengths. For me, a practical tool that people could use is taking a strengths assessment prior to the interview. So you have vocabulary to truly showcase what those strengths are, how you use it on a day to day basis. So not just rattling off a list of strengths, but really the interviewer wants to see, are you aware of what those strengths are? And then what's the value you bring through that strengths into a team setting? So that would be a practical tool, I would say, is not to try and wing it, but actually do an assessment. We use the Gallup Strengths Assessment. And so either reach out to a coach or you can go online and do it yourself to truly understand what they are and help you to prepare for that conversation.
I love that, Terentia, and I hadn't thought too much about it because obviously we always talk about the strengths and weaknesses question that comes up in different
Mm,
interviews. Being able to articulate what that strength is, and also being able to understand where you have shortcomings is extremely important. But maybe let me take a step back, because I'll
mm,
explain why that the experience there is important. So being able to articulate your experience. Why am I talking about emotional response or communication? The reality is, when you're in an interview, people have this feeling, right? I used to hate hearing hiring managers say this. They have a good gut feeling. I've got a
yeah.
gut feeling about this candidate. And it makes it sound like these interviewers were dropped from the heavens, right? And they just are natural assessors and they can just pick out talent out of a crowd. The reality is, it comes down to how you make that person feel. And
Yes.
human beings build trust, and we build the ability to connect with people based off of, like, the human brain is a very advanced computer, and so when we
Absolutely.
say, oh, I feel good about this, that's because there's a lot of micro calculations that your brain is doing without your awareness, which might be
Yes.
your
Yes.
confidence, your tone of
Yes.
voice, your eye
Yes.
contact. your ability to recall information, right? So that people can feel comfortable with what you're actually communicating them with. And my argument to everybody is you struggle to be able to focus on that unless you know yourself and your experience. And the longer in the tooth you are, the longer you've been in the industry, the more information there is to recall. And when people start to ask you pointed questions and you're unable to recall that information, it slowly starts to dig away at that level of trust. And so it's such a fun. I love studying this because it is part of emotional touch, about emotional control. It's about looking at
Yes.
how you're actually communicating with the person across the table with you. First, it starts with knowing yourself, both from a strengths
Absolutely.
perspective and a weakness perspective, and from a skills based perspective.
Absolutely. I think recently I saw a clip from Simon Sinek talking about, during interviews when people ask, what are your weaknesses? And people have the natural default response, oh, I'm a perfectionist. Never use that line. I think it does you more disservice. But really, again, it's an opportunity to demonstrate your self awareness, because you coming on a team and being able to understand what is it that you don't do well, the interviewer is able to see, you know what, I already have those strengths and skills on the team. You don't need to be perfect at everything that is needed, but you're also demonstrating that you are open to learning and getting better at it. So even though you may acknowledge that that's a weakness, but it's also an opportunity for you to be able to say, I want to learn and get better at that. So again, demonstrating that self-awareness to the interviewer really holds you in a good place.
If you turn that on its head, I mean, we're talking about, if you're thinking about yourself in that interview scenario, then yes,
Mm.
you don't want to demonstrate your weaknesses, and it becomes a bit of an ego exercise rather than
Yeah.
understanding, why does someone ask you that question to begin with? It
Yeah.
isn't actually to draw out all the negatives. It's wondering if you are A, self-aware, but B, have you put in practical strategies because of that self-awareness to minimize those weaknesses?
Yes.
And I love, people say it's an outdated question. I still think it's a fantastic question because it's actually allowing people to demonstrate vulnerability. I am
Yes.
struggle with this. For me, I've always had to struggle with organization in that question. And it's been something that, like, I have to be very conscious of. I hate booking any holidays. Ask my partner, anything that has to do with structure. I like being a salesperson. I like being outgoing. I like responding to different things without having much structure. That in its own mindset demonstrates as a strength, but it
Absolutely.
is also a weakness. So what do? I make sure I set a day schedule. I make sure I use tools now, including AI and schedulers. So when a hiring manager hears, okay, this is something I know Nathaniel's not great at, but he can figure out ways to work
Mm.
around those weaknesses. That's what people are looking for. And we're going to get into the situational questions separately, but remember, a hiring manager is asking you these questions to understand how your mind works and how you think,
Yes.
because they're going to spend a lot of time working with you. And if they
Yes.
think that you're never going to be able to acknowledge that issues exist or be able to fix them, they're less likely to want to move you forward in the interview process.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah, I think that's such a valid point that you've just raised. It's really demonstrating the vulnerability. So, if people haven't heard about Brene Brown as yet, the power of vulnerability, I'm putting a plug in here on this episode to go and watch that TED Talk. It's one of the most watched TED Talks on vulnerability. It is really a strength, and being able to demonstrate that strength in the interview, I think, really just puts you ahead of the pack.
So, we've looked a little bit at can you do the job? And one of the
Mm.
elements I wanted to add in here, and T, maybe best I'll let you, because it was something
Mm.
you talked to me before the episode of something you were keen to discuss, but the STAR method. I
Yes.
talk to people about, we've talked through the technical questions. So people are going to be coming after you for technical knowledge, and you need to be able to demonstrate it. Sometimes that comes across as just direct technical questions or asking about your background and experience. But then it changes to another part of the interview where now the interviewer wants to know, how does this person embrace conflict, challenges, problems? There's situational based questions. What are the best ways that you've utilized, or tools that you can maybe recommend that people can use in that scenario?
Absolutely. For me, as you've said, is the STAR method. So, for those that are not familiar with the STAR method, STAR is an acronym that stands for situation, the task, the action, and the result. Now, the reason why I would really recommend this method is because it helps you to bring some structure into your story. So, as you said in the beginning when we started this podcast, it's about storytelling. How are you going to convey the story to the person asking you the question? Now, what happens in our brains when we have anxiety, when we have a bit of fear, and all of these things are mixed together, and you are now sitting in front of an interviewer? The story gets muddled up, right? So you could take somebody, all the way to Timbuktu on a story and the message does not land. And so what serves you well in an interview is actually having structure. So if somebody says, give me an example of a particular aspect or strength or a skill that you're trying to demonstrate, apply the STAR method. So think of a situation that you were in. What was the task that was asked of you? What did you need to deliver, right? And then what actions did you take to apply yourself in terms of that particular task or project, whatever the case may be? And then the most important is then land on what were the results? What were the tangible results that came out of you applying those actions? And what we've found is that the interviewer is then able to see how you can take them on a journey. They can see how you would potentially respond to either a similar task or a challenge, really, that you would have been faced with. But then what are your thought processes to get you to the result? Because at the end of the day, all they're trying to see is, do you have the right, do you have an approach? Do you have the approach that fits with the culture of their team, of the organization? And then are you someone who then perseveres to get there to that end result? And so maybe part of your story is telling them, I took a certain route, but then I quickly realized that it wasn't working, and I was able to pivot very quickly, stop what I was doing, and try something else. So that shows adaptability, it shows agility, and it shows that you are not afraid to take risks to get to a result. And so I really would recommend that STAR method: the situation, the task, the action, and the result.
The STAR method, I mean, I love it too. And I think I always say to people that there are various other methods out there and people have used other structures and acronyms but the STAR method, it's so similar to like when someone wants to build a story, I always say
Yes.
you compare it. It's almost close to there's a setting, there's the plot, there's the build up of excitement to the climax,
Yes.
to the resolution, and then the learning, right? You learn something at the end. And
Agreed.
the only thing I would add to your structure is remember that they're trying to understand how your brain is working, and in one question you can demonstrate a range of strengths. And what I mean by that is
Yes.
being able to set the scene. So what was the situation? Many people, when they're asked a technical question, sometimes you can jump to the end, sometimes you jump straight to the problem. But when you do
Mm.
that, you
Mm.
then are like, oh my God, I have to talk about where I was. And then, oh, this was the solution. It's not clear. The story is not
Yeah.
straight. And again,
Yeah.
that disengages someone who's listening to the story. So setting the structure, good. Most people going into strategic roles, leadership roles, the interviewer is looking to see if you can analyze a situation appropriately. So when you're sitting down and going, this is the company I was at, this is the situation that was happening, here's the background information. Also, key tip, it's a great opportunity for you to give you more information on the role you had at that time, which you may not have been able to include in your introduction. Um, and then you get into what was the task. And that's where you want to absolutely be saying I a lot. So a lot of people make the mistake of saying we, us. And I always indicate that it's not about not showing you're a team player. Obviously, you want to be a team player, but they're looking for you taking accountability. What did you really lead or
100%.
take into that project? Um, and when it comes to the actions, remember you generate solutions a range of different ways, and they're analyzing your deductive reasoning. So, in a highly technical environment, perhaps to generate an action or a solution, you had to bring a team together, or you had to put an all hands team together. Maybe you had to speak to a supplier, but you generated various solutions to the problem, but you selected one for a reason. But all of those solutions that you're demonstrating in your STAR method question are demonstrating different key strengths, whether that is communication, transparency, teamwork, unity, etc. Um, and the solution that you then select, the only thing I'd add to that is there's short-term solutions. So did you fix the problem? And then long term, how did you ensure that problem would never happen again? So that you learn, and then what did you learn from it? And I love saying that hiring managers don't mind that you've made mistakes. That said, please don't use a situational question where you didn't fix the problem. Yes, believe it or not, people have used questions where the site's shut down or whatever, and they haven't learned or fixed it. Use questions to say, this was the solution I generated, and here's what I learned from it. Because I love it when I hire people that have made mistakes and they've learned from it as a result. It makes them a much stronger professional.
100% agree. I think those, again, bringing in that element of emotional intelligence, right? It's not just about demonstrating the technical skills that you have, but also showing from an emotional perspective the response you've had, acknowledging the mistake, but then how have you learned from it? How have you moved from that place? That's all we are asking from humans, is actually learning and evolving, learning and adapting, learning and being agile the next time you're presented with something similar. That is all we can ask for from someone joining the team. So for me, that is really what I want to see demonstrated as a hiring manager from the person that I'm interviewing, not just the technical skills, but that ability to reason, that ability to control emotions, that ability to learn from what they are doing and then do better when you know better. Yeah.
When you look at so we're still in can you do, so we're only still in
Mm,
the first third, but the
yeah.
can you do part of the interview, don't forget that the interviewer is going to be asking you lots of questions, technical questions, situational questions. So the last thing I want to leave listeners with before we move on to the next portion is when you're doing your introduction. So a lot of times people will say, introduce yourself, give me an overview of your experience, right? One mistake I can see people do is being too detailed in your introduction. Be
Mm,
aware that you're in an interview, you're going to be asked key questions and details. When they're asking you about your history or where you got to today, or introduce yourself, remember you want it to be almost like your elevator pitch, as we call it,
yes.
right? An overview of
Great.
your experience, a highlight of your key achievements, and the reasons you made the move that you did. What's the chronological reasons? It's told as a story. So
Yes.
just I dropped this in here because I coach candidates who are especially people coming from highly technical backgrounds. You feel like you want to cover off everything that you've done, every
Mm,
responsibility and impact. Give yourself space. You'll have time. They're going to be asking those questions and those key details.
agree.
So give yourself a good introduction. Focus on understanding your key technical details and be ready to respond to situational questions. If you've ticked those three boxes, you'll do well. And I love filling people with confidence with the idea that, look, at the end of the day, there's certain things you can change. There's certain things you can't change. You can't
Yes.
change your experience. The experience you have is the experience you have. So
Yes.
don't stress about it.
Mm,
But what you can change is how much you prepare for an interview and how much research you do about the company. If you do
mm,
those things, great. What you can't change is your personality. So don't worry about how you're coming across. Yes, important that your presentation is well, but you want to go somewhere where people accept you for you and that your experience is going to
agree.
be relevant. So give yourself the confidence to step into the interview knowing what you know and what you don't know.
Great advice. I think we've spent a lot of time on that step one. Can you do the job? Because I think that's the crux of the interview. I think step two, where we're talking about now, do you want the job, is what can you do to complement uh, the preparation you've done on step one. So do you want to kick us off? Do you want the job? What is the first thing somebody should be preparing for?
I love this. This is one of my favorite parts. I spent a lot of time in an interview discussing this because I literally was responding to a LinkedIn post yesterday. I think it got taken down,
Mm,
but someone was saying they should replace the "Why do you want to work here?" question,
mm,
and that they should, and the company should sell more to the candidate, and actually it should be, we should sell to
mm,
them and sell to them before they. And I disagree. I do think
mm,
that you need to be able to articulate why you are in the room. And
mm,
whether you're headhunted, whether you have applied to a job online, there's a reason you've taken this interview, and you need to be able to articulate that reason strongly and supportively. So I classify motivations in two buckets: emotional motivations and rational motivations. And interestingly, this question will be asked either at the beginning of the interview or it'll be asked at the end of the interview. And that's important because it either sets the tone or it leaves the lasting impression in your interviewer. And it's funny that that people can make or break their interview with this question. In fact, people who've interviewed for Impel Talent have made or break their interview, because it comes down a lot to your motivations and your alignment to our values, our vision, when you think of all of those things. So what are emotional and rational motivations, you might ask? Emotional motivations are things that get you excited about the job opportunity, get you excited about the company, and get you excited overall. They're what invoke an emotional response. And I consider these what we call primary motivators. They should be the first things you list when someone asks you, why would you like to work here? You start with things that invoke an emotional response. That's because people want you to want to work for them. So please lead with that aspect. But two, interestingly, when you interview with people, it has a little, I don't want to say like Jedi mind trick, but human beings, if you compliment, right? So if someone's been working for a company for 10 years, they probably like where they work. Or if they're a hiring manager hiring for their team, they like their job. So when you're able to talk about why you like that company, why you like their values, what you've seen about recent news, it does play a bit of a trick. It releases dopamine in the brain of the interviewer, right? It's like paying someone a compliment. And it adds to that gut feeling we've been talking about. So, less likely people want you to talk about rational motivations. Rational motivations are secondary. They are still important. I mentioned to people that these are things like, let's say you want to relocate back to your hometown, or you want to change your career into a different job type, right? Or they are practical pieces that if you lead with those, like I've had the mistake of candidates saying, oh, I want to relocate to Italy, right? And that's their first motivation. And even though they're not saying them in any particular order and it's not their primary motivator, human beings automatically attribute the first words that you say as the primary, most important pieces. If I ask you to list your favorite holiday destinations in no particular order, the first one you say, I will believe has a personal significance to you. And people have burnt their bridges this way because people don't find them motivated towards the company. They think they're motivated towards a outcome. But it's still important that they're utilized, because in reality, emotional motivations convince them that you want the job. Rational motivations convince them that if they offer you the job, you would take it. And what I love about that is when we get into the negotiating floor, does a hiring manager and HR want to go up the ladder to fight for a salary increase that I've requested? If they don't think the person is rationally going to accept the role? No. So both have a role to play, but just make sure you're listing them in the right order.
I love that. So in summary, that company research is you exploring and getting intel in terms of where the connections lie. So whether it's the purpose, the vision, the values, you also finding connection points. And it's also demonstrating to the hiring manager, you are self-aware, right? So if you say, this company value really resonates with my own values, that already gives the hiring manager, oh, wow, that is also a good company fit, a team fit, an organizational fit. Again, these are clues that the interviewer is trying to pick up along the way, because they've just really met you, right? All they've seen is what you've written on the CV. Now they're trying to marry that CV to the human behind that CV. And they just, again, it's these touch points that build trust over the course of that interview, whether it's 45 minutes, 60 minutes. It's not a long time. So you almost need to accelerate those connection points by touching on what you've said, the motivations and from a rational perspective. Yeah.
Rich, I love that. And it's so important. So it depends on the maturity of a company. I mean, me and you, we coach companies on this all the time. It depends if the values on the wall are a marketing exercise or if they're really used in the hiring process. And we've worked for both types of companies, whether that is what they would like to do or not like to do, and it's just the reality that they're sat in. That said, HR is typically, if you're sat in a technical interview, you might be sat with a hiring manager and HR, and you tend to find that HR starts to ask more of the more of the soft skill questions and a lot more of the values-based questions. And it is so, if you are already starting to acknowledge those values, you're already starting to align, it does show and I say to people that research can be demonstrated and it's so cool to see that you've done your homework and see where the company is going and that you're aligned with the values of the business and the job profile and the JD. You will nail that question.
Absolutely. I think one other thing I'd like to add is you as the interviewee walking into that room with questions for the interviewer. So if you've, read something on their website or an article or post that you've seen that maybe employees have written, imagine going into that interview armed with curiosity about, hey, I read this. This was something that really stood out for me. Can you tell me more about this? It shows again your interest, but it also shows that you are willing to ask questions. So it may be a tough question. Maybe it's, they have come out of a chapter 11 or, a bankruptcy, or and they've turned the corner, they've turned the tide. And so really asking questions along that line of, how did that happen? How did you do it? It shows that you are interested. It shows that you're interested in the type of leadership, because again, you get to interview the interviewer as much as they are interviewing you. So I think sometimes we may forget that you walking into an interview are not just the person being asked all the questions, but you get to interview that company. You get to interview the style of leadership that hiring manager has, because again, you're making choices based on those different elements. If you are walking out of a previous company where the leadership was not something that you are connecting with, you don't want to go from the frying pan into the fire, right? Into the next role. You want to ask these questions about how do you develop your people? How do you invest in them? So if those were things that was not sitting well with you in your previous company, and maybe not just that previous role, but maybe some roles before, and you said to yourself, I will only take a role if this, and this are met for myself, then ask those types of questions, because that's going to give you intel to also sign that contract when it is potentially presented to you.
Yeah, I always said, Candace, that the first 80% of the interview is you in the hot seat. It's definitely
Mm,
you being, and I always reiterate that point because I do think I work with a lot of passive candidates. I work with a lot of candidates who are not looking, and actually I'm facilitating introductions. But you need to be in the position to really demonstrate why you should be there, because in order to get to an offer, to get to an outcome, you need to
yeah,
impress and demonstrate your abilities. But you do have the opportunity to ask key questions, and and those questions can also turn interviews around. I always say to people that they should use assumptive questions. Talk about the future, talk about what the role should look like to you in the next 6 to 12 months. What are the plans for the team or the projects? And if it's stuff that you've already seen online, if you can ask how they're going about the approach and you're starting to analyze how you will make an impact already, or asking them how you can make your best impact in the first 12 months or the first 6 months. Questions where you're already putting yourself in the seat of the position go over a really good way. And I also think it's sort of like, again, your gut feeling feels good about this person because they're almost acting like they're in the role already, right?
yeah,
So think about perception and think about impact. But I loved all of that, T. And I think
great.
the final piece is the added
Mm,
value. And
absolutely.
this is a shortened piece, really, but because we've
Mm,
touched on a lot of it already. But
mm,
I say to candidates, what are the three things that set you apart? Or what are things that you want to communicate in this interview? Because you are in control of the dialogue to a degree, right? So when somebody has giving when you've got an up like I'll use myself as an example. I've worked in executive search now for 12 years. I started my career in supply chain management. I studied supply chain management and I've done recruitment in that industry for so long. It is a unique thing that makes me special. I have yet to meet, or I meet maybe one in 100 recruiters that might have some sort of engineering or supply chain background when they come
yeah,
into recruitment. I know it's my unique selling point. So you might imagine that it comes up in my introduction because it's who I am and it's my personality and it's talking about my journey. It might come up in a situational question. I might say, well, look, because of my supply chain background, could utilize that to help a hiring manager write these job briefs. And it might come up in my motivations because I have a passion for this area. So
mm,
what I'm saying is don't beat people over the head with your unique selling points, but I know strategically where I can put my strengths in a conversation that I've done the preparation for, whether
yeah,
it's in my introduction, whether it's in a situational question, or whether it's part of my motivations, but it allows me to control the dialogue. So think about that.
absolutely.
And that if you're a product on a store shelf, I think everyone's seeing the trend at the moment of making themselves an action figure on
Yes.
Chat ChatGPT. Think about what would be the 3 things that would sell you as a product on the box out front to catch
Amazing.
a user's attention, and then lean into that, because it's what can help you control your own dialogue in the interview.
I would add to that because sometimes, there's people that we've coached when we ask that question to them, they don't really know. And so I would say go to 2 or 3 people that you really trust and ask them, what is the value I bring to you? And get that information, that's data for yourself, right? To again have that confidence when you are presenting that to an interviewer, that it is what the people around you think, because it wasn't just a gut feel from yourself, but you actually asked people around you, what is it that gets done that won't get done if I'm not in the room, right? So, what is the value that I'm bringing? What do you see as the value that I bring? And you will be surprised how much intel and data you would get that you can then use and confidently convey this message across. So, if you don't know where to start, if to list these 3 things, start with at least 2 or 3 people that you trust, that you know will give you that data for you to be able to use that in.
I love it. And if I could take it one step further, if you're using an external recruiter, many of us, unfortunately, it's part of just the process these days. If they are external to the end client, perfect person to ask, where do you see in my profile that makes me a strong candidate? Where do my strengths lie? Because realistically, that person has probably communicated that to the end client, and what maybe they see within your profile or feedback they've received from the client to push that interview forward. And you mentioned it, T, in the questions you can ask. So typically an interview process can be 2 or 3 stages. Make sure you understand what those stages are. You can ask your recruiter that, or the internal talent acquisition. The reason I ask that is because you may find that in your first interview, you're meeting with the line leader, who's the direct hiring manager. Second interview might be with the director or the VP or the next level up. In that interview, being able to ask a question that might be, what strengths do you like about my profile, or how do I add value to your existing team? Because you can position it in a way that is a bit sneaky. I like being a bit sneaky. I said, where do you see my strengths in alignment with your existing team, and where are the benefits of bringing me into this group?
Yeah.
And why don't you have this skill set internally? They're feeding you information that you can then use in interview number 2 to amplify where they see you meeting their pain points to excel in that interview.
Love that. So I love chatting with you about these 3 steps. Can you do the job? Step 1. Step 2, do you want the job? And then step 3, what's your added value? I think just having a framework like that, I really think that people that are listening, it's something that they're able to put some meat on the bones, right? And again, if you're not sure where to start, you can always reach out to us. We do career coaching here also at Impel Talent, really to support you on that journey to be able to present your best self. I think that's the key here, is what we are trying to convey that message.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you that this structure that I've put together, that I'm letting you all have for free. So everyone, you're welcome. I developed this methodology because I used to do recruitment for one of the hardest companies to get people into, which was AB InBev. AB InBev were a very, very difficult client to do hiring for their G-Tech department in Belgium. And the reason it was so difficult is they wanted very highly technical people, some of the best in the world, but they also had what they called their values and their 10 ABI principles. And they really drove home these values. And it's because of the working environment that AB InBev operated in was very high pressure, very high reward, but it had their values and their mission and their vision were heavily crucified in those interviews. And so I realized I had to build a structure that allowed people to accelerate in those interviews and meet their pain points so that they could progress. So take that from a company of that size, of that nature. This was a very successful process of getting people in the door. So do the same. Go through the tips and tricks that T and I have presented to you today. Make sure you take time aside to prepare. That is the biggest, I find that the biggest difference is just taking time out for 30 minutes, an hour to just prepare and come into that interview knowing what you need to know and using those 3 concepts and understanding the mindset of the person you're interviewing with. Because if you can understand the interviewer, you understand your experience, and you focus on your delivery, you're going to knock the interview out of the park.
Amazing. Well, with that, thank you everyone for listening. We really enjoyed sharing this with you. As always, if you have any questions, please send it to us on our email address, info@impeltalent.com. And take care, have a blessed week, and we will see you in the next episode.
And go nail that interview. Hey, thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe. You can listen to us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, TuneIn, or even on our website at www.breakingthechain.online.